The museum's new exhibit was a taxidermy dog. Now I live in an asylum. The doctors here have a name for what happened to me. Dissociative fugue, they call it. A psychotic break brought on by stress and isolation. They say I invented a story to cover up a crime so brutal my own mind couldn't accept it. They say I'm sick. Maybe they're right. But when the night is quiet and the only light is the moon filtering through the barred window of my room, I know what I saw. And I know that somewhere, up in that infinite silent black, the loneliest dog in history is finally home. It all started at the museum. That's a grand word for what it was. In my little hometown, a place with more boarded-up shops than people, the local plastics tycoon built the Starlight Cosmos Pavilion as some kind of elaborate tax dodge. That was the rumor anyway, and seeing the place, you'd believe it. It was a monument to cheapness. Rockets made from what looked like painted oil drums listed to one side. Satellites pieced together from scrap metal and rusted bolts hung from the ceiling on fishing line. The planetarium was just the dome of the main hall, with the planets sloppily painted on the ceiling by a guy who clearly thought Jupiter was supposed to have rings and Mars was blue. Still, it had a kind of sad charm. For a town with nothing, it was something. And for me, it was a job. I was the night guard. My duties consisted of walking the perimeter once, then holing up in the break room with a thermos of bitter coffee and a stale donut until dawn. It was peaceful. The echoes of my own footsteps were the only company I needed. I'd play games with myself, trying to recite the facts on the little plastic plaques before I read them. I knew everything there was to know about our shabby collection of cosmic junk. Some people find that kind of solitude unnerving, but I thrived on it. In the dead of night, surrounded by tin cans and cardboard cutouts, there was nothing to fear. That police ended the day they hired the new janitor, Casimir. He was a wiry man with eyes that seemed too old for his face, perpetually lost in some distant thought. We fell into an easy routine. He'd finish his rounds, mopping the grimy linoleum floors, and join me in the break room. We'd share a flask of cheap whiskey, a silent pact against the crushing boredom of the night shift. It was smart, unnervingly so. When he was a few drinks in, he'd start rambling. Not about the usual stuff, but about the space race. He'd talk about phantom cosmonauts, men the Soviets sent up in secret who never came back, their heartbeats just fading into static. He claimed the moon landing was a sham, not in the usual way, but that the footage was real, only it was a Russian landing that the US had stolen, dubbed over, and edited. He knew things. He'd point out the flaws in our exhibits, the incorrect number of rivets on the Vostok 1 model, the wrong shade of heat-resistant tile on the Buran shuttle. I'd look it up later, and he was always right. But he had this tic. This awful, unsettling habit. Sometimes, in the middle of a sentence, he'd just stop. Completely. He'd freeze, his hand halfway to his mouth, his eyes locked on something I couldn't see. He wouldn't be stiff like a statue, but still, like a photograph. A moment trapped in amber. After a few seconds that felt like an hour, he'd blink, mutter something under his breath in a language that sounded like sandpaper and static, and carry on as if nothing had happened. The first time, it was weird. The 10th time, it was terrifying. I told myself it was just exhaustion. The night shift does strange things to a man. I should have trusted the cold dread that coiled in my gut every time he did it. 3 weeks after Casimir started, the owner brought in a new exhibit. It arrived in a plain wooden crate with no return address. Our local carpenter pried it open and set it up on a small, velvet-draped pedestal. Inside was a taxidermy dog. A border collie, the plaque said, wearing a faded, off-color orange spacesuit. A crudely stitched USSR flag was peeling off its back. The plaque gave her a name, Laika. To say it was poorly done would be a kindness. It was a monstrosity. The thing barely resembled a dog. Its snout was too long and pointed like a fox's, and the stuffing was uneven, giving its body a lumpy, distorted shape. Its head and ears were practically deflated, loose flaps of skin and fur. But the face, dear God, the face. The eyes were glass orbs that bulged from their sockets, unblinking and wild. And it was smiling. Not a dog's happy pant, but a wide, gaping grin that pulled its lips back to show every single yellowed tooth and a stretch of dry grey gum. It was a smile of pure, unending agony. The worst part was the fur. It was a deep, matte black, but not like a healthy coat. It looked scorched, as if it had been exposed to an intense, searing heat. In some places, the fur was fused together into brittle, charcoal-like clumps. When the light hit it just right, you could see a faint, iridescent sheen like oil on a puddle. A faint, acrid smell clung to it, the smell of burnt hair and sterilized metal. The town's reaction was immediate and visceral. Kids would see it and burst into tears. Adults would stare, their faces a mixture of disgust and pity. We got phone calls, dozens of them. People accusing us of displaying a real burned animal. The cops came by a few times, did a cursory check, and left, shaking their heads. After a while, they just stopped coming. The story started almost immediately. The daytime janitor swore that the air around Laika's exhibit would grow intensely hot, a pocket of shimmering, oppressive heat that would vanish as soon as you stepped away. One of the tour guides, a college kid just trying to make a buck, quit mid-shift. He claimed that every time he looked over, Laika's bulging eyes were looking right back at him, and that just before he ran out, he saw her head twitch, a tiny, sickening jerk to the side. Even the owner, the man who brought her in, got spooked. He made a call, tried to have her sent back to wherever she came from. The day he was supposed to arrange the shipment, he died. A freak accident. His old furnace backfired, and the resulting fire burned his house to the ground. After that, the town took over the museum, and with a fresh injection of public funds, the place actually got a much-needed facelift. A blessing in disguise, some said. I thought they were all being ridiculous. In the quiet of my shifts, Laika was calm. The stories felt like small-town hysteria. I found myself drawn to her exhibit. It was positioned directly beneath a large domed skylight. On clear nights, the starlight would pour in, bathing the grotesque little dog in a soft, ethereal glow. Looking at her, surrounded by the cosmos she briefly touched, I felt a strange sense of kinship. Here I was, a lonely man watching over a forgotten museum. And there she was, the loneliest creature in history, a stray plucked from the streets of Moscow only to die alone, unimaginably far from home. Maybe, I thought, she didn't mind the company. I started talking to her, my voice a low murmur in the cavernous hall. A lonely guard and his taxidermy dog keeping watch over the painted stars. Right around the time Laika arrived, Casimir stopped showing up for his shifts. One night he was there, freezing mid-sentence while staring at the new exhibit, and the next he was gone. Vanished. The museum administration didn't seem to care much. They figured he'd just moved on, and since the place was getting a bigger budget, they eliminated the night janitor position altogether. Then the astronaut came. It started subtly. A feeling. At precisely midnight, the atmosphere in the museum would change. The air would grow heavy and thick, like I was wading through water. Sounds became dull and muted. My own thoughts felt slow, syrupy. The first time I saw him, it was just a shape out of the corner of my eye, a flicker of movement outside the main entrance. I wrote it off as a trick of the light, my mind playing games on me. But he came back, night after night. A tall figure standing just beyond the glass doors, motionless. He wore a bulky orange spacesuit, the same washed out, sickly orange as Laika's. His helmet was a sphere of pure reflective black. I couldn't see a face, just a distorted reflection of the museum's interior and my own pale, gaping face staring back. I told myself it had to be Casimir. Who else would have this kind of obsession? He gets fired, and now he's trying to spook me as payback. It made a twisted kind of sense. Casimir was a strange guy, but he was harmless. A bit of a crank, but never aggressive. Still, every night, the sight of that silent, watching figure chipped away at my resolve. This went on for weeks. The feeling of being watched became a physical weight on my shoulders. November 3rd. The date is burned into my memory. The night started like any other. I did my rounds, past the leaning rockets and the peeling planets. I paused at Laika's exhibit, the moonlight catching the grotesque curve of her smile. A knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. I decided a couple of beers from the break room fridge would settle my nerves. As I sat on a stool, tipping the bottle back, a movement in the doorway made me freeze. He was inside. Standing there, not 10 feet away. The orange suit, the black void of the helmet reflecting the flickering fluorescent light of the break room. Time seemed to stop. I could hear my own heart hammering against my ribs. My mind screamed that someone had broken in, that this was real. "Stop right there," I yelled, my voice cracking. He turned and bolted. I was after him in a second, the beer forgotten. Adrenaline and alcohol surged through me, a nauseating cocktail. He was fast, impossibly so. Every time I rounded a corner, he was already halfway down the next hall, a flash of orange against the gloom. And the museum. It was changing around us. The hallways seemed to stretch, the walls breathing in and out. The models of the satellites spun on their wires, casting dizzying skeletal shadows. The painted planets on the ceiling above seemed to swell and drip like melting wax. He was leading me somewhere. The chase ended where I knew it would. In the main hall beneath the skylight. The full moon was a spotlight, illuminating Laika on her velvet pedestal. The astronaut stood before her, his back to me. "Casimir, stop this," I gasped, winded. "Look, man, I'm sorry they let you go. It's a stupid prank. Just get out of here. We can get a drink when my shift is over. Just go." He stood perfectly still for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached up with both hands and lifted the helmet from his suit. What was underneath wasn't a person. It wasn't a trick. It was nothing. A perfect, clean, impossible absence. Where his head and neck should have been, there was only empty space, a gaping hole at the top of the suit. My mind simply refused to process it. I stood, paralyzed, as the headless thing walked calmly to the exhibit. With a strange, reverent grace, it picked up the taxidermized dog. Then, it began to stuff the lumpy, scorched body into the hole where its head should be. I heard the dry crackle of the old fur and brittle skin as the thing forced the dog's torso down into the collar of the suit, leaving only Laika's head protruding from the top, her bulging eyes and agonizing smile now perched atop the astronaut's body. Then came the fire. It didn't erupt. It bloomed. A silent purple-white flame that started at the figure's feet and swathed its entire body in an instant. There was no smoke, no sound of burning, just this cold, ethereal light. It stood there, motionless, a pillar of silent flame. My daze of terror finally broke. The fire alarm shrieked, and the sprinklers kicked in, showering the hall in a downpour of cold water. But the fire on the astronaut didn't even hiss. It just kept burning, untouched, as the water turned to steam around it. For what felt like hours, I watched as the figure was cooked inside its suit, the orange fabric blackening and peeling away to reveal something charred and skeletal beneath. When the police finally arrived, they found me soaked, shivering, and rambling incoherently. They found a body, too. A headless corpse, charred beyond recognition inside a melted spacesuit. Manslaughter, they called it. They said I got drunk, had a fight with the transient who'd been squatting in the museum, and set him on fire. My story, the one I'm telling you now, was all they needed to lock me away in here for a very long time. The official report mentioned one other thing. No animal remains were found at the scene. The taxidermy dog, they said, was missing. So now I sit here. The nights are long. I spend most of them at the window, looking up. The stars are beautiful from here. Sometimes I think I see a new one. A tiny, faint orange spark moving slowly across the black. Maybe I am insane. Maybe I did invent it all to hide from some terrible truth. But in my heart, I know better. I know that what I saw was a rescue, a long overdue journey home, and that somewhere, out there in the cold, beautiful dark, the loneliest dog in the universe isn't lonely anymore.